No one in that stadium thought this drive would matter. Not the crowd, not the commentators, not even some of the men wearing the same uniform as Joe Montana. The scoreboard was brutally honest. Time was almost gone. The defense on the other side was the most feared unit in football, and Joe Montana stood there, helmet on, calm, almost detached, while the noise around him grew louder, heavier, desperate. This was the moment quarterbacks are remembered for, or erased by. On the sideline, a coach muttered the words no leader ever wants to hear. "We're finished." It wasn't meant for Montana, but he heard it anyway. He didn't react, didn't argue, didn't look offended. He simply adjusted his chin strap, because what most people in that stadium didn't understand was this. Joe Montana had already been here before. Not on this field, not against this defense, but inside this exact kind of pressure, when everything screams panic and only one thing matters: clarity. The huddle formed slowly. 11 men walked toward him, some breathing heavy, some avoiding eye contact. They had just taken hit after hit. The defense across from them looked relaxed, almost bored. They believed the game was already over. And honestly, why wouldn't they? Every statistic said it was over. Every sports writer in the press box was already finishing their sentence. Joe Montana looked at their faces. Fear, doubt, exhaustion. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't give a speech. He smiled, not a cocky smile, not a dramatic one. A quiet, unsettling smile, as if he had just noticed something no one else had. "All right," he said calmly. "We're going down the field." Some of them blinked. One player almost laughed, thinking it was sarcasm. It wasn't. Across the line of scrimmage stood a defense built to end games. Big, fast, disciplined. They thrived on moments like this. They didn't just stop quarterbacks, they broke them. They had studied Montana for weeks. They knew his tendencies. They knew his rhythm. What they didn't know was what happened inside Joe Montana's mind when the world decided he was done. The ball was snapped. The pocket collapsed almost instantly. A defender broke through untouched, exactly as designed. Most quarterbacks would flinch. Most would rush. Most would panic. Joe Montana stepped up, not backward, not sideways, forward, just enough. The throw wasn't flashy. 8 yards, nothing special. The chains moved. The crowd didn't cheer. They were too stunned to react. The defense reset quickly, irritation flashing across their faces. That wasn't supposed to happen. Second play. This time they disguised the coverage. They wanted him to hesitate. Joe Montana didn't. The ball left his hand before the receiver even turned his head. Completion. Another first down. Now the noise changed. Not excitement. Unease. The sideline that had been slumped moments ago straightened up. Helmets snapped into place faster. Players started believing, not loudly, not foolishly, but quietly. The most dangerous kind of belief. Between plays, Montana didn't rush, didn't look at the clock, didn't look at the scoreboard. He looked at the defense, studied them, not as a wall, as a puzzle. Each snap, he took something from them. A step too early, a shoulder leaning the wrong way, a safety drifting half a second late. This wasn't desperation football, this was surgical. A linebacker finally shouted something across the line. "You're not getting out of here." Joe Montana heard it. He nodded once, as if acknowledging a fair point. The next play was the first time he was truly hit. A blindside rush, helmet to ribs, the kind of hit that rattles your vision and steals air from your lungs. Montana went down hard. For a brief moment, everything stopped. He stayed on the ground longer than usual. The defense stood over him, satisfied. The crowd held its breath. A coach started to step forward. Then Montana stood up. No limp, no anger, just that same calm expression. As he jogged back to the huddle, he said something so casual, so unexpected, that one of his teammates would later say it changed everything. "Good hit," Montana said. "They're starting to rush inside." That was it. Not "we're in trouble," not "we need to hurry," just information, just control. And in that moment, something shifted, because everyone on both sides realized the same terrifying truth. Joe Montana wasn't surviving this drive. He was controlling it. And the most important plays, the ones that would define him forever, were still ahead. The moment Joe Montana stood back up after that hit, the defense changed its tone. They stopped celebrating between snaps, stopped smirking, stopped acting like the game was already theirs. Now they were talking to each other in short, sharp bursts, hand signals, head nods, quick pointing. That's what great defenses do when something starts slipping. They tighten the screws and try to end it with violence. Montana walked to the line and saw it instantly. The safeties weren't sitting back anymore. They were creeping forward, just a few inches, just enough to threaten the middle. The corners were playing with a different kind of patience, baiting him into an outside throw. And the The linebackers were staring into his eyes like they wanted a mistake more than they wanted a tackle. The crowd noise rose again, but it wasn't hope, it was pressure. That sound you hear when 50,000 people are leaning forward at the same time, not sure if they're about to witness a miracle or a collapse. Montana placed his hands under center. He didn't call for some heroic bomb, didn't chase a highlight. He took what the defense hated giving up, small precise damage. Snap, quick slant, 5 yards. Next snap, running back in the flat, 7 yards. Next snap, a hitch route, timed perfectly before the corner could break, first down. The defense tried to punish him for it. A late shove, a shoulder delivered with extra force, a helmet pressed into his chest after the whistle. Montana never responded. He just got back up and reset the formation, like the whole thing was boring. And that is what started to scare them, because fear isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the silence of a man who refuses to acknowledge you. The drive kept bleeding forward. Yard by yard, the clock kept draining, and with every completion, the defense got more desperate. They brought a blitz. Not subtle, not disguised. A full aggressive charge, meant to crush the pocket and force a mistake. Montana recognized it before the ball was even snapped. He didn't audible in a panic. He didn't wave his arms like a man drowning. He simply changed one word that flipped the entire play. Snap. The rush exploded through the line. Montana didn't retreat. He stood tall and waited until the last fraction of a second, until the defense was committed, until the angle was impossible to change. Then he released the ball over the blitzing linebacker's shoulder, threading it into the space that didn't exist a moment earlier. Completion. A huge one. The crowd finally erupted, but the sound felt different now. It wasn't loud because they were excited. It was loud because they were realizing the truth. This drive was not dying. It was becoming inevitable. On the sideline, the opposing coach stepped forward and shouted for a timeout. You could see his face, angry, confused, trying to stop something that wasn't behaving like a normal game. His defense jogged to the sideline, helmets tilted down, breathing hard. One of their toughest, slammed his fist into his own thigh. Montana watched them regroup. And here's the part most people don't understand about the greatest quarterbacks. They aren't just throwing passes. They're studying you like a thief studies a lock. Montana noticed something in that timeout. Something tiny. Their safety, the one responsible for the deep middle, was cheating. Not much, half a step, but consistent. He didn't trust the short game anymore. He was scared of the quick routes, scared of being embarrassed in front of the whole stadium, so he kept inching forward, half a step at a time. Montana went back to the huddle and spoke quietly, like he was ordering dinner. They're stepping up. We'll use it. His receiver looked at him like, when? Montana didn't answer, because he wasn't chasing when. He was waiting for now. They broke the huddle. At the line, Montana called a play that looked harmless. Another short concept, another safe route, another way to keep the chains moving. The defense relaxed for a split second, thinking they'd solved him. Snap. Montana took a 3-step drop. The pocket held barely. His eyes looked left. The safety stepped forward again, exactly as Montana predicted. Then Montana's head turned. Not panicked, not rushed, just a smooth shift of focus, and the ball launched. Not a desperate heave, a clean, confident spiral that cut through the air like it belonged there. For a moment, everything slowed. The receiver sprinted into the open space behind the defense, the space the safety had abandoned without realizing it. The crowd's roar turned into a single rising scream. A defender tried to recover, but he was already too late. His angle was wrong. His feet were heavy. His mind was half a second behind reality. The receiver reached out and caught it. A massive gain. The stadium detonated. But Montana didn't celebrate. He immediately waved everyone back to the line. His offense hurried, not frantic, focused, like they were executing a plan, not improvising. The defense was rattled now, truly rattled. And that's when the most dangerous thing in football happens. A great defense starts playing emotional. They started jawing again, shoving, pointing, overcommitting. Montana saw it all. He saw the cracks, and he knew the final moment was coming. Because now they were close enough to smell the end zone, close enough for the pressure to become unbearable, close enough for one mistake to decide everything. Montana stepped into the huddle one more time, voice calm. "This is where they break," he said. And then, without raising his tone, without drama, he gave the instruction that would lead directly to the play people would talk about for decades. Run it exactly. Trust me. They lined up. The clock was bleeding out. And the defense was about to throw everything they had at him, because they still believed this was the moment Joe Montana would finally fail. They were wrong. The defense crowded the line, not subtly, not cautiously. They brought everyone forward like men who believed this was the last stand, helmets low, hands twitching, voices shouting last-second adjustments meant more to intimidate than to inform. This was no longer about coverage, it was about force. Joe Montana stepped behind center and felt it immediately. The tension, the hunger, the desperation. The kind of pressure that turns games into legends or nightmares. The clock ticked down. Every eye in the stadium locked onto him. This was the moment sports talk shows replay for decades. The moment where quarterbacks either force something stupid or freeze entirely. Montana did neither. He scanned the defense one last time. The safety was cheating again. The linebacker was leaning inside. The corner on the right was just a fraction too aggressive. And suddenly, everything aligned. This was it. Montana didn't rush the snap, didn't signal urgency. He let the defense sit in their fear. Then, snap, the blitz came exactly as expected. Bodies exploded through the line. A defender broke free clean, charging straight at Montana's chest with violent intent. There was no pocket anymore, no protection, just chaos. Montana took a step back, then another, then stopped. He didn't throw immediately. He waited. That pause, less than a second, felt like an eternity. The defender lunged. At the last possible moment, Montana released the ball. Not high, not wild, a soft arc, almost casual, the kind of throw that looks wrong until you realize it's perfect. The receiver broke free in the corner of the end zone, just as planned, just as timed. The defender trailing him, dove, arms stretched, fingertips scraping air. Too late. The ball dropped gently into the receiver's hands. Touchdown. For half a second, there was no sound. The stadium needed time to understand what had just happened. Then it erupted. Not a cheer, an explosion. Helmets flew into the air. Coaches sprinted down the sideline. Fans screamed like they were witnessing something sacred. Joe Montana jogged toward the end zone, expression unchanged. No fist pump, no roar, just that same calm walk, as if this outcome had been inevitable all along. The defense stood frozen, some with hands on hips, some staring at the turf. One player dropped to a knee, staring straight ahead, not blinking. They had thrown everything at him, and he had waited them out. The extra point went through. The scoreboard changed. The game was no longer theoretical. It was decided. When the final seconds expired, Montana didn't celebrate wildly. He shook hands, walked toward the sideline, like a man finishing his job. But the aftermath told the real story. On the sideline, players surrounded him, not cheering, not shouting, but quietly, respectfully, like men who had just witnessed something they would never forget. One teammate would later say, "It felt like he already knew how it was going to end. We were just catching up." Across the field, the opposing coach stood still long after the final whistle, arms crossed, staring at the spot where the touchdown had been scored. When asked later what went wrong, he didn't blame coverage or execution. He said one sentence: "We gave him time." In the locker room, reporters rushed in, shouting questions. "How did you stay so calm? Did you know the play would work? Is this the greatest drive of your career?" Montana sat down, removed his helmet, and answered without hesitation, "I just did what the situation required. That was it. No mythology, no exaggeration. But the mythology grew anyway, because players talk, coaches talk, and stories like this don't fade, they sharpen." Years later, defensive veterans would still mention that drive in quiet conversations, not with anger, with awe. They would say things like, "You couldn't scare him. He didn't hurry. He didn't panic. He waited for you to make the mistake." That drive became more than a highlight. It became a standard. The moment people point to when explaining what separates good quarterbacks from legendary ones. Not arm strength, not speed, control. When everyone else believed the game was over, Joe Montana didn't fight the pressure. He used it. And that's why, long after the stadium lights went dark, long after the crowd went home, one truth remained untouched. They told Joe Montana he was finished. One drive later, he rewrote history.